in the bustling heart of ancient Rome, amidst the thunderous clash of steel and the whispered plots of senators, there existed a woman whose legacy would forever be intertwined with the rise and fall of empires. Aemilia Tertia, a daughter of noble blood, was no ordinary Roman matron. Her life, though largely hidden from the annals of history, was the backdrop to some of the most significant events in the Roman Republic. It was the life of a woman who would stand beside one of the most renowned military commanders in Roman history, Scipio Africanus, the man who defeated the legendary Hannibal at the Battle of Zama. Aemilia's story begins long before she would marry Scipio. Her life, marked by familial duty, personal sacrifice, and the growing influence of the Roman aristocracy, would become the tale of how a woman, though often in the shadow of the men around her, could wield power in her own right, shaping not only the future of her family but also the destiny of Rome itself. In the heart of Rome, long before the empire's expansion across continents, there stood a family whose bloodline was as ancient as the city itself, the Aemilius family. The story of Aemilia Tertia, daughter of Marcus Aemilius Lepidus, begins here, in the grand halls of a noble Roman house, where power, ambition, and the fate of the Republic were often decided. The Aemilii were one of the oldest and most influential patrician families in Rome, a name synonymous with authority and respect. They had long held positions of power in the Senate and had contributed to Rome's rise as a formidable force on the Italian peninsula. From the early days of the Republic, the Aemilius family had been key players in both the military and political arenas. Their status was not just a matter of wealth and title, it was a matter of tradition, an inherited responsibility to lead, protect, and shape the future of Rome. Aemilia's father, Marcus Aemilius Lepidus, was a man of great ambition and influence. His father, also named Marcus Aemilius Lepidus, had been one of the key leaders in the early days of the Second Punic War, and although he had died when Aemilia was still a young child, his legacy loomed large over the family. Marcus Aemilius Lepidus, Aemilia's father, was well-versed in the intrigues of Roman politics, having served as a consul and later as one of the triumvirs. His ascent to power was marked by calculated alliances, shrewd diplomacy, and a deep understanding of Roman law. His influence, however, came at a personal cost. The cost was the time he spent away from home, leaving Aemilia and her siblings under the guidance of their mother, a woman of strict virtue and decorum who ensured that they were raised in the proper ways of Roman society. From a young age, Aemilia Tertia was taught to understand the weight of her lineage. She learned the intricacies of Roman politics and diplomacy, the importance of family alliances, and the role of women in maintaining the social fabric of Roman life. Yet, like many women of her time, her education was centered around her future role as a wife and mother rather than as an independent political agent. Roman women of the upper class were expected to manage households, bear children, and provide support to their husbands in matters of state. However, this did not mean that women were powerless. On the contrary, they often exercised influence behind closed doors, guiding the decisions of their husbands and sons through persuasion and subtlety. As Aemilia grew older, the weight of her family's expectations became more pronounced. She knew that her life would be shaped not just by her own desires, but by the ambitions of those around her, particularly her father, who viewed his daughter as a valuable pawn in his larger political schemes. The Aemilius family was deeply invested in the power struggles that defined Roman politics during the late Republic. Their fortune was tied to the success of the Republic itself, and Aemilius' marriage would be an important piece in the intricate web of alliances that held the Roman elite together. It was during these formative years that Aemilia first heard whispers of the man who would change the course of her life forever, Publius Cornelius Scipio, known to history as Scipio Africanus. Scipio was a man of exceptional talent, destined for greatness from an early age. Born into the Cornelius family, another of Rome's most distinguished and wealthy houses, Scipio's youth was marked by a series of early military successes, but it was his role in the Second Punic War, the conflict between Rome and Carthage, that truly catapulted him into the annals of history. The Second Punic War had begun in 218 BCE, when the Carthaginian general Hannibal Barca crossed the Alps with his army, including war elephants, and brought the war to Roman soil. For years, Rome struggled against Hannibal's brilliant tactics and his ability to strike at the heart of the Republic. Cities fell, and Roman armies were crushed. Yet, Scipio, still a young man at the time, distinguished himself in battle, first in Spain and later in Africa. It was in Spain that Scipio's brilliance first came to light. As a young officer, he displayed tactical genius, capturing key Carthaginian strongholds and pushing the Carthaginian forces further south. His victories in Iberia made him a hero in Rome and a rising star in the Roman Senate. By the time he was in his early 30s, Scipio had earned the admiration of both his fellow Romans and his enemies. But it was in 202 BCE, at the Battle of Zama, where Scipio cemented his place in history. Having maneuvered Hannibal out of Italy and into Africa, Scipio faced the great general in a final, decisive confrontation. The battle was brutal, but Scipio's strategy, combining both Roman discipline and adaptability, led to a crushing victory. Hannibal was defeated, and the Second Punic War came to a close. Scipio returned to Rome as a hero, hailed as Africanus for his triumph in Africa. It was during this time of victory and glory that Scipio and Aemilia Tertia's paths would cross. Aemilia, still a young woman, was now in her prime years for marriage. Her family, like many in the Roman aristocracy, saw marriage as a way to strengthen their political alliances, and Scipio's newfound fame made him an ideal match. First, their marriage was not one of great romantic love, but rather one of mutual benefit. Aemilia's father, Marcus Aemilius Lepidus, recognized that aligning the Aemilius family with Scipio's could bring great power and influence. The union of the two families would provide political leverage, military connections, and a deeper foothold in the Roman elite. Yet, despite the political nature of their union, it would soon become clear that Aemilia and Scipio shared a deep respect for one another. Aemilia, with her keen political instincts and sense of duty, proved to be an invaluable partner to Scipio. While he was away leading Rome's armies, she managed the family estates, ensuring that everything ran smoothly in his absence. She took her role as the matron of their house seriously, attending to the needs of their children and managing the complex relationships between the powerful families of Rome. Aemilia's influence, though often hidden behind the public grandeur of Scipio's military career, was felt throughout the corridors of power. She was the quiet strength behind Scipio, offering counsel when needed and ensuring that their family's interests were always advanced. But Aemilia's story is not just one of political alliances and marital duties. It is also the story of a woman who navigated the complex social and political fabric of ancient Rome with grace and intelligence. As Scipio's fame grew, so did the scrutiny on Aemilia. The expectations placed upon her were enormous, yet she rose to meet them with a quiet determination. In the public eye, Aemilia was the epitome of Roman virtue. She was a devoted wife and mother, dedicated to the success of her family and the well-being of her children. Yet, behind the scenes, she was also a woman of immense influence, helping shape the political destiny of Rome and her family's future. Marcus Aemilius Lepidus, Aemilia's father, was a man of great ambition and influence. His father, also named Marcus Aemilius Lepidus, had been one of the key leaders in the early days of the Second Punic War, a conflict that would change the very fate of Rome. The elder Lepidus had been appointed as consul, and though his tenure was marked by political turbulence, it solidified the Aemilius family's reputation in Rome. For Aemilia, born into this world of political intrigue and military prowess, the weight of her lineage was both a privilege and a burden. From a young age, Aemilia was taught to understand the delicate balance between power and responsibility. Her mother, a woman of noble birth but largely unknown to history, was a matron of the old Roman ideals, strict, dignified, and profoundly committed to her family's legacy. It was her influence that shaped Aemilia into the lady she would become, one who understood the importance of her marriage as not just a personal union but a political alliance. The Aemilius family's power was intricately tied to their political roles. Marcus Aemilius Lepidus, the father, served as consul multiple times and was an influential figure in the Senate, a member of the prestigious Optimates, those who supported the traditional Roman aristocracy. However, his ambitions did not always align with the interests of Rome's emerging power dynamics. As a man who constantly sought to strengthen the position of the senatorial elite, Lepidus would find himself in conflict with some of the more populist leaders of the Republic, particularly those who wished to shift the balance of power toward the common people. It was in this atmosphere of political uncertainty and military pressure that Aemilia grew up. While her father was embroiled in political dealings, her mother's role was to manage the family's estate, ensuring that Aemilia and her siblings were raised with the necessary education and morals to one day inherit the mantle of leadership. Young Aemilia was taught to read, write, and understand the great works of Roman law, history, and philosophy, ensuring that she could navigate the complex world of Roman society. Yet, despite this foundation in Roman virtue, Aemilia's world was not one of isolation. As the daughter of a prominent family, she was often at the center of Rome's elite social gatherings. At these events, she learned the art of conversation, the politics of marriage alliances, and the necessity of forging relationships with powerful men. But unlike many women of her time, Aemilia was not merely a passive participant in these conversations. She listened, she observed, and she absorbed the intricacies of Roman power like a sponge. In these years, she began to form her own understanding of the Roman Republic and the political games that would one day shape her own destiny. The young woman was also surrounded by men of great political stature, men who would later play pivotal roles in shaping the course of history. Among these men was Publius Cornelius Scipio, a rising star within Rome's military and political circles, though Aemilia was initially unaware of the profound impact he would have on her life. Fate had already set the stage for their eventual union. The Scipio family was another pillar of Roman aristocracy, known for their military prowess and unwavering commitment to Rome's dominance in the Mediterranean world. The rise of Publius Cornelius Scipio, later known as Scipio Africanus, was a testament to the strength of his bloodline and his personal ambition. As a young man, Scipio was molded by the military campaigns of his father, Publius Cornelius Scipio the Elder, and his uncle, Gnaeus Cornelius Scipio, both of whom had fought valiantly in Spain during the early phases of the Second Punic War. The Second Punic War had been a defining conflict for Rome. In the year 218 BCE, Hannibal, the Carthaginian general, had led his army, including war elephants, across the Alps, catching the Romans off guard and inflicting devastating defeats at battles like Trebia and Lake Trasimene. Hannibal's victories seemed to spell doom for Rome, and the Republic teetered on the edge of disaster. The Scipio family, however, proved to be resilient. Scipio Africanus, who had been just a boy when the war began, would eventually rise to become the man who would defeat Hannibal at the Battle of Zama in 202 BCE, securing Rome's supremacy in the Mediterranean for centuries to come. But before he became a legend, Scipio was just a young man, eager to prove himself in the face of overwhelming adversity. His path was one of challenge, both on the battlefield and in the Senate, where his bold ideas often clashed with the more conservative elements of Roman society. He was a man of charisma and vision, able to inspire loyalty among his soldiers and navigate the intricate politics of Rome's ruling class. It was this combination of military genius and political savvy that would eventually lead him to Aemilia's door. The marriage between Scipio Africanus and Aemilia Tertia was not one born of love at first sight, but rather one of mutual benefit and political necessity. As with many noble marriages in Rome, the union was forged for reasons of power, prestige, and the consolidation of influence. Aemilia's father, Marcus Aemilius Lepidus, saw in Scipio a powerful ally who could secure the future of his family. Likewise, Scipio, after achieving military glory and securing his place as one of Rome's greatest generals, sought to solidify his own status through an alliance with one of the most respected families in the Senate. Their marriage took place in 210 BCE, during a time when Scipio's career was beginning to take off. Aemilia, though still a young woman, was already well-versed in the ways of Roman politics and understood the significance of the alliance. The union brought with it not only a powerful husband but also the prestige of the Scipio name, which would help elevate her standing in Roman society. Despite the political nature of their marriage, there were glimpses of affection between the two. Aemilia, while dutiful and reserved, admired Scipio's ambition and military genius. Scipio, in turn, recognized Aemilia's intelligence and strength, qualities that made her not just a wife, but a partner in his ambitious plans. Though their union was primarily one of political calculation, it would evolve into one marked by a deep respect for one another. As Scipio prepared to leave Rome for Spain and North Africa, where he would carry out the military campaigns that would eventually lead to his historic victory over Hannibal, Aemilia was left behind in Rome, bearing the weight of responsibility for their estates and the future of their family. During these years, Aemilia would prove herself not only as a wife and mother but also as a shrewd political operator in her own right, managing the affairs of the family with grace and decisiveness. As Aemilia Tertia entered her teenage years, the weight of her family's expectations became more apparent. She was not simply the daughter of Marcus Aemilius Lepidus. She was a piece in the great political game of Rome. Her marriage would not only secure her family's place among the elite, but it would also define the future of Roman politics. The stakes were high, and for Aemilia, every decision, every gesture, every conversation was a step toward fulfilling the destiny that had been shaped for her since birth. But Aemilia was more than just a pawn in the hands of political maneuvering. Beneath the surface of the Roman aristocracy, with its complex webs of alliances, power struggles, and honor, there was a woman with her own dreams, desires, and ambitions. She had inherited her mother's intelligence and her father's keen political instincts. Her early life had been a blend of strict Roman discipline and an awareness of the immense responsibility that came with her noble status. However, unlike many noble women of the time, Aemilia harbored a quiet ambition to carve out a legacy of her own, one that would transcend the expectations of her family. Despite her personal yearnings, Aemilia knew her duty. Her marriage to Scipio Africanus, the rising star of Rome's military elite, was already arranged by the time she was 18. Scipio was a young man whose renown had spread through Rome and beyond after his victories in Hispania. He was not just a military commander, he was a symbol of Roman strength, a leader who had already proven himself against the Carthaginian forces, and one of the few men in Rome who seemed capable of winning the Second Punic War once and for all. The match between Scipio and Aemilia was not one born out of passion or love, but out of necessity and ambition. Aemilia, for all her beauty and intelligence, was acutely aware of the political advantages this marriage would bring. She had seen her father's work as consul and senator, and she understood the immense pressure of Roman politics. By marrying Scipio, she would secure her family's position at the heart of Rome's military and political future. But more than that, it was clear that Scipio himself needed her. His family, though of high standing, was still fighting to consolidate its influence against other powerful Roman families, particularly the Cornelii and the Fabius. The marriage was celebrated with great fanfare, and the union between Scipio and Aemilia was heralded as a triumph for both families. The streets of Rome echoed with the sounds of celebration as the couple was wed in a grand ceremony, attended by senators, generals, and members of the Roman elite. For the people of Rome, it was another spectacle, a reminder of the power and prestige that marriage could bring in their society. For Aemilia, the event was a moment of both pride and quiet resignation. She was stepping into a world far larger than herself, a world where duty would always come before personal desire. As the couple began their life together, Aemilia quickly found herself drawn into the turbulent world of Roman military and political life. Scipio, ever ambitious, was determined to continue his rise, and his marriage to Aemilia brought him not just a beautiful wife, but a partner who understood the intricacies of Roman society. She was more than just a companion. She was a confidant, a political ally who could help him navigate the challenges of Roman politics. Their early years together were marked by the backdrop of war. Scipio, now a military tribune, was quickly called to action in the war against Carthage. He had already made a name for himself by leading successful campaigns in Hispania, and the Roman Senate, eager for a decisive blow against the Carthaginian general Hannibal, appointed Scipio to lead the Roman forces in Africa. The war, which had raged for over a decade, was at a critical juncture, and Scipio was seen as Rome's best hope for victory. Though Aemilia remained in Rome during Scipio's campaigns, her role was far from passive. As the wife of one of Rome's greatest military commanders, she became a figure of public importance. Scipio, whose victories in Hispania had earned him the title Africanus after his successful campaigns in Africa, relied on Aemilia's steady influence back home. The young Roman general was a symbol of Rome's hopes, and as his wife, Aemilia was thrust into the role of political strategist, even if only from afar. During Scipio's absence, Aemilia played a crucial part in managing their estates and ensuring the continuation of Scipio's military and political influence in Rome. While the Senate debated the ongoing war and the need for reinforcements in Africa, Aemilia worked behind the scenes, leveraging her family's connections to strengthen Scipio's political position. One of the key events during this time was Scipio's proposal to the Senate for a daring invasion of North Africa. The idea was bold, a calculated gamble that, if successful, could bring the war to a swift conclusion and deliver Rome a decisive victory. But it was a risky move, and many in the Senate were skeptical. While Scipio prepared for his campaign, Aemilia used her influence to rally support for his cause, writing letters, meeting with key political figures, and doing everything in her power to ensure that Scipio's plan would be approved. As Scipio made his way to Africa, Aemilia found herself caught in the web of Roman politics. The Aemilius family, though powerful, was not without its rivalries. Aemilia's father, Marcus Aemilius Lepidus, had his own ambitions within the Senate, and the political landscape of Rome was rife with factionalism. While Scipio's rise to power was supported by many, it also created enemies within the Senate. Some saw his ambition as a threat to their own power, and this led to tensions between the factions. Aemilia, aware of the danger that these rivalries posed, worked to navigate the complex political waters of Rome. She was a constant presence in the Senate, attending meetings, offering advice to key senators, and doing what she could to protect her family's interests. Her role was often that of a quiet but powerful influencer, someone who could sway opinions with a well-timed word or a carefully placed gesture. Her beauty and intellect were often overshadowed by the political machinations of the men around her. But it was clear that Aemilia's influence on her husband's rise was profound. As Scipio's campaign in Africa advanced, and his forces neared Carthage, Aemilia's own legacy was being shaped back in Rome. The Senate, in recognition of her role in supporting Scipio's cause, awarded her the title of Mater Familias, a title of respect that acknowledged her influence within her family and her role as a matron of Rome. This title was a recognition of the quiet power that Roman women often wielded behind the scenes, influencing their husbands, their sons, and their city. Aemilia's story, though often told through the lens of Scipio's victories, was also one of personal resilience and ambition. Her marriage, forged in the fires of Roman politics, was one of mutual respect and collaboration. Scipio, though often absent on the battlefield, relied heavily on her to manage their affairs and to ensure that his political future was secured. As Scipio prepared to face Hannibal at the Battle of Zama, Aemilia knew that the outcome of the battle would not only secure Rome's future, but also solidify her own place in history. The world was on the brink of change. Rome's destiny was being shaped by the hands of men like Scipio Africanus and women like Aemilia Tertia, whose quiet influence would echo through the ages. The battle that awaited Scipio in Africa was not just one of military might. It was a battle for the very soul of Rome itself. It was the summer of 210 BCE, and the Roman Republic was embroiled in the desperate struggles of the Second Punic War. Rome, though victorious in some battles, was slowly being drained by the relentless brilliance of Hannibal Barca, the Carthaginian general who had brought the mighty Roman legions to their knees. The Republic, once confident in its dominance, now stood on the brink of collapse, and its leaders knew that drastic action was required. Aemilia Tertia, though young, had already begun to understand the weight of her role in this turbulent time. The Aemilius family had long been at the heart of Roman politics, but now the family's influence was in jeopardy. Her father, Marcus Aemilius Lepidus, had already served as consul, and his political maneuverings had earned him respect among the Senate. But in the age of Hannibal's victory at Cannae, the stakes were higher than ever. Aemilius' marriage, like those of many women of her class, was a matter of political calculation. Her family had long debated which alliance would secure their future, and the future of Rome, most effectively. It was through this lens that Aemilia first came to meet Scipio Africanus, the young commander who had already earned a reputation for his military genius. Publius Cornelius Scipio, the man who would later be known as Scipio Africanus, was in many ways the perfect match for Aemilia. A man of honor, ambition, and brilliance, Scipio had been hailed as one of Rome's greatest military minds. His victories in Spain had already set him apart from his peers, and it was said that he had the unique ability to inspire his troops with an almost supernatural resolve. He was the son of the great Scipio, the consul who had fallen in battle against Hannibal, and his rise to prominence was seen as a beacon of hope for a republic on the brink of disaster. But Scipio was not merely a soldier. He was a man who understood the intricacies of Roman politics, and he knew that his future and the future of his family was inextricably linked to the Senate's decisions. When Aemilia's family considered the possibility of an alliance with the Cornelii Scipiones, they saw an opportunity not only for political advantage but also for the preservation of their own power in the Republic. The marriage between Scipio and Aemilia was more than just a union of two families. It was a union of two political forces, both seeking to secure their place in a Rome that was being reshaped by war. The wedding itself was a grand affair, one that echoed with the ancient traditions of Roman marriage. The bride dressed in a white stola, her hair bound in the traditional hairstyle of the noblewomen of Rome, and the ceremonial offering to the gods made before the marriage was consummated. Aemilia, though feeling the weight of this political arrangement, also understood that her role was pivotal in this great game. She was no longer just a daughter of the Aemilius family. She was now a partner in one of the most important alliances Rome had ever seen. Scipio and Aemilia's marriage, though forged out of necessity, was not without its personal dynamics. In the early years of their union, Aemilia found herself both drawn to and in awe of her husband. Scipio was a man of incredible energy and intelligence, whose mind worked tirelessly on strategy and military tactics. He had already won victories in Hispania and was set to take his place among the great leaders of Rome. However, it was not just his military prowess that fascinated Aemilia. It was his ambition, his desire to carve out a legacy, not only for himself but for the very city that had given him life. He was a man who understood the intricacies of power, and Aemilia, with her own keen political instincts, found herself captivated by the possibilities their union could bring. For Scipio, Aemilia represented more than just a political asset, though his heart was consumed with the desire to defend Rome and its people. He also recognized that Aemilia was an intelligent and capable woman in her own right. She was not merely a Roman matron fulfilling her duty. She was a partner in the truest sense, one who understood the delicate balance between power and responsibility. Over time, the two would develop a deep respect for one another, a respect that would later evolve into affection and love. It was a love built not on the romantic ideals of poets but on mutual understanding, shared ambition, and the recognition that they were bound together by destiny. As Scipio prepared to leave Rome to take command of the legions in Spain, Aemilia's role in their marriage shifted. She became not just a wife but a sounding board for his strategies and decisions. From their letters, those precious missives sent across the seas to the far-flung reaches of the Roman Empire, we know that Aemilia offered counsel, sharing her thoughts on matters of both military and political importance. Scipio, in turn, relied on her wisdom, knowing that her insights could often be as valuable as those of his closest advisors. In Rome, Aemilia became a key figure in maintaining the stability of the home front. While Scipio was away, she managed the family's affairs, ensuring that their political alliances were maintained and their interests protected. She attended Senate sessions, hosted dignitaries, and worked tirelessly behind the scenes to ensure that her husband's efforts were not in vain. Her intelligence and political acumen were acknowledged by those who interacted with her. And while the public eye often focused on Scipio's military achievements, Aemilia's role in his success was undeniable. As Scipio's military career reached its zenith with his triumphs in Hispania and his eventual campaign against Hannibal, Aemilia's influence grew. Her position was not just that of a wife but of a trusted advisor, one whose counsel shaped the course of Roman history. And though her role was often overshadowed by the glory of Scipio's victories, her contributions were not forgotten by him, by her family, and by the republic she served. Through their marriage, Aemilia Tertia would prove that even in a world dominated by men and military glory, a woman of intelligence, ambition, and grace could make an indelible mark on history. It was in the aftermath of the devastating Battle of Cannae that Rome's aristocracy began to consider drastic measures to secure the Republic's survival. The Senate, still reeling from the loss of an entire legion, summoned the greatest minds and generals of the Republic to turn the tide of war. Among these was Scipio Africanus, a man who would eventually rise to legendary status, not only for his military genius but for the powerful alliances he forged. Scipio Africanus was born into a family of distinction, a scion of the Cornelia gens, and had been trained in the arts of war from a young age. His father, Publius Cornelius Scipio, had been killed at the Battle of the Ticinus, leaving his son to carry on the family name. At the time of the Second Punic War, Scipio was a young officer with boundless ambition and a vision for Rome that transcended the traditional military tactics of his time. His keen mind and unyielding determination set him apart from his contemporaries, and it was clear to the Senate that he might be Rome's best hope in the face of Carthaginian supremacy. As Scipio prepared for his campaigns in Spain and eventually North Africa, he was also, unbeknownst to him, preparing for a marriage that would forever intertwine his fate with that of Aemilia Tertia. The marriage was not born out of love at first sight or a great passion, but rather a meeting of political minds, a union between two powerful families in Rome, each with their own motivations and desires for power. Aemilia had been raised to understand the pragmatics of Roman aristocracy. She had already been betrothed to another prominent nobleman, but the tides of political necessity demanded a different path. The Roman Senate had made it clear that Scipio was the man who could lead them to victory against Hannibal, and Aemilia's marriage to him would cement her family's place in the shifting landscape of Roman politics. When Aemilia met Scipio for the first time, it was not a meeting of two strangers from different worlds, but rather the quiet recognition of two people who understood the power dynamics of their time. Aemilia, with her noble grace and keen political insight, recognized the brilliance of Scipio. Scipio, in turn, saw in Aemilia a woman who was more than just the daughter of a powerful family. She was an intelligent, capable ally who would prove invaluable in the challenges ahead. Their courtship, if one could call it that, was swift. There were no grand gestures or poetic declarations of love. Instead, it was a calculated arrangement, a political alliance forged in the crucible of war and necessity. Yet, as with all such unions, the personal and the political were deeply intertwined. As the days turned into weeks, Aemilia and Scipio began to find a respect for one another. Aemilia, though outwardly calm and composed, was not blind to the challenges that lay ahead. Scipio, despite his military prowess, found in Aemilia a steadying influence, someone who could temper his ambitious drive with wisdom and caution. Their wedding was a grand affair, held in the heart of Rome. The ceremony, though traditional in its form, was tinged with the weight of history. This was no ordinary marriage. It was a union of Roman power, a merging of two forces that would shape the future of the Republic. As they exchanged vows, the city of Rome, still shaken by the looming threat of Carthage, held its breath. In the shadow of the war with Hannibal, every political move, every alliance, every marriage was a matter of survival. For Aemilia, the reality of her new life as the wife of Scipio Africanus was both daunting and exhilarating. She was now part of the Scipio family, one of the most respected and revered in Rome. But as she stood at Scipio's side, Aemilia was also confronted with the burdens that came with being the wife of a general of his caliber. Scipio's military campaigns would take him away from Rome for long periods, leaving Aemilia to manage not only the domestic affairs of their household, but also to navigate the treacherous waters of Roman politics. In Rome, her name was now linked with his, and her actions were scrutinized as much as his, though she understood her role in the larger political narrative. Aemilia was not a passive observer. She began to develop a keen understanding of the military strategy that defined Scipio's genius, and in the quiet moments they shared, Scipio would often speak to her about his plans for Rome's future. Their conversations were never idle chatter. They were discussions of Roman destiny, of the paths Rome must take to secure its survival and dominance. In the midst of all the political intrigue, battles, and strategic movements, Aemilia's role as a wife was often overshadowed by the grandeur of Scipio's campaigns. Yet, she was far from a mere figurehead. Her intelligence, her ability to manage their household and maintain political connections, made her an integral part of Scipio's success. More than once, her counsel would be sought by those in power, and her influence would extend beyond the walls of her home. But it wasn't only politics that shaped Aemilia's life during these years. The personal toll of living with a general constantly at war began to weigh on her. Though she loved Scipio deeply, there were moments of loneliness, moments when she wondered if their marriage, which had begun as a political alliance, would ever truly become something more. The constant threat of death that hung over Scipio and his soldiers loomed large in her mind, and she found herself praying for his safety as he ventured into the unknown. Would she ever see him return victorious? Or would his life be claimed by the relentless hand of war? As Scipio's campaigns in Spain began to show promise, and his military successes mounted, Aemilia's position became even more significant. The political landscape of Rome was shifting, and the young general's victories were garnering not just the admiration of the Senate, but the awe of the Roman people. Yet, in the quiet moments of reflection, Aemilia often wondered whether the path she and Scipio had embarked upon was truly one of love, or whether it was simply a political necessity dressed in the guise of marital duty. In the years that followed, Aemilia would witness firsthand the rise of her husband as one of Rome's most celebrated generals. But she would also experience the personal sacrifices that came with being at the center of such monumental events. Her role as a wife, political partner, and a Roman matron would be tested in ways she never anticipated. But through it all, Aemilia remained a pillar of strength, supporting Scipio through his triumphs and his failures, understanding that the fate of Rome and of their marriage was forever intertwined. As the winds of war carried Scipio farther from Rome, Aemilia found herself not just the wife of a general, but a woman who understood the deeper currents of power, loyalty, and sacrifice that defined the Roman world. With each campaign Scipio embarked upon, Aemilia would become more than just the wife of a commander. She would become a symbol of Roman virtue, a testament to the strength of women who stood behind the men who shaped the fate of nations. Aemilia Tertia's life, once filled with the strict duties of a Roman matron, had now taken a dramatic turn. As the wife of Scipio Africanus, she was no longer just a figurehead of her noble family. She had become part of the heart of Roman military and political ambition. Her marriage to Scipio was not only a personal union, but a significant political alliance that tied her family's future to the fate of the Republic. As Scipio began to rise through the ranks of the Roman military, Aemilia found herself constantly on the edge of a storm. Her husband's exploits were being watched by the Senate, by Rome's allies, and by her enemies. Yet, amid the clamor of war and politics, Aemilia also had to navigate the complex world of Roman high society, where power was often as fragile as it was fleeting. The couple's relationship, while built on mutual respect, was far from easy. Scipio was a man of singular focus, dedicated entirely to his military campaigns. For him, every decision was shaped by the needs of Rome. Every moment of his life was spent thinking about strategy, the next battle, the next campaign. Aemilia, while deeply supportive of her husband's ambitions, often felt the sting of his absence. She had married a man whose dreams were as vast as the empire itself. And with each passing campaign, she had to reconcile herself to the reality that their marriage was not one of equal partnership in the conventional sense. The distance between them grew, though their bond remained strong in a way that transcended the ordinary. However, it was not only Scipio's military career that occupied the couple's lives. With each victory he earned, the political weight of his status grew heavier. The Senate, particularly the Optimates faction, saw Scipio as a necessary force for Rome's survival. But there were those who feared the power he was amassing. For Aemilia, it was impossible to ignore the growing tensions. She had always been aware of the precarious nature of Roman politics. One wrong step could lead to disgrace or even death. Yet, as her husband continued to achieve victory after victory, she began to sense the danger that came with such power. Her life, too, was becoming entangled in the complex dance of Roman politics. As the tides of the Second Punic War continued to shape the destiny of Rome, Aemilia Tertia's life as a Roman matron grew increasingly complicated. Scipio Africanus, now firmly in the role of one of Rome's most celebrated military commanders, was consumed by the demands of war. His mind was always on strategy, his thoughts on the next campaign, the next battle that could decide the fate of the Republic. But for Aemilia, the war was something else entirely. It was not just a matter of military conquests, it was a matter of the heart. The years following her marriage to Scipio were filled with personal sacrifice for Aemilia. She had expected the challenges of marriage, of course, but nothing could have prepared her for the loneliness that came with being the wife of a man so devoted to his country and his soldiers. When Scipio left for Spain in 211 BC, Aemilia remained behind in Rome, managing their estate and maintaining the social and political standing of the Cornelia family. She was no stranger to duty, but the separation from her husband weighed heavily on her. During his absence, Aemilia not only had to manage the affairs of her home, but she was also a political figure in her own right. Rome's elite families expected her to keep up appearances, to attend public ceremonies, to be the face of the Aemilius-Cornelia alliance in the Senate. But these public roles felt increasingly hollow, and the bustling streets of Rome, with their marketplace chatter and Senate debates, seemed so distant from the quiet solitude of her private chambers. Her thoughts were often consumed by the uncertainty of Scipio's fate. In the darkest of moments, Aemilia wondered whether her husband would ever return from the front lines, whether the Republic would continue to be shaken by Hannibal's brilliance or if it would fall to the shifting sands of time. But she was not one to dwell in despair. Aemilia had inherited a strength from her mother that allowed her to endure hardship without ever showing her vulnerabilities. The Roman matron, a figure of dignity and poise, was a symbol of resilience in the face of adversity. Aemilia held onto that ideal fiercely, knowing that Rome depended not only on its military leaders but also on the silent strength of those who supported them from home. As the years passed, the public image of Aemilia as the devoted wife of a hero grew stronger. But privately, she struggled with the long absences, the uncertainty, and the complexity of her emotions. At times, she felt like a spectator in her own life, watching as Scipio's military career flourished while she remained behind, hidden in the shadows of his glory. But through it all, Aemilia's own strength and resolve shone. She became a quiet pillar of support for Scipio, her love for him a steadfast flame that would not be extinguished by the harsh realities of war. One fateful day, in the year 201 BCE, Aemilia received word that would forever change the course of her life. Scipio, after years of campaigning in Spain and North Africa, had finally achieved the unthinkable. He had defeated Hannibal Barca at the Battle of Zama. The Carthaginian general, once considered unbeatable, had been brought to heel by Scipio's brilliant strategy. The victory marked the end of the Second Punic War, and with it, the beginning of a new chapter in Roman history. For Aemilia, the news was both a moment of profound relief and bittersweet joy. She had feared for her husband's life throughout the war, and now, with his victory, came the knowledge that he would return as one of the greatest military heroes in Roman history. Scipio's triumph would forever be etched into the annals of Rome. But for Aemilia, the victory was personal. She had been the silent strength behind him, enduring the long years of separation, the uncertainty, and the political maneuverings, all for this moment. When Scipio returned to Rome, he was greeted with a hero's welcome. The streets were lined with cheering citizens, and the Senate awarded him a triumph, one of the highest honors a Roman general could receive. But amidst the celebrations, Aemilia was keenly aware that the man who had returned to her was not the same man who had left. Scipio, having witnessed the horrors of war and the sacrifices of his soldiers, was more distant, more consumed by the weight of his victory and the looming future. Though the victory at Zama had secured Scipio's place in history, it also created new challenges for both him and Aemilia. With his newfound fame, Scipio was thrust into the political spotlight of Rome. The Senate, the people, and even his fellow generals looked to him as a potential leader of Rome's future. He was courted by the optimates, the traditionalists who sought to maintain the power of the Senate, but also by the populares, those who sought reform for the people of Rome. For Aemilia, this shift in her husband's status meant navigating a new world of political intrigue, alliances, and rivalries. Though she had always been a part of the Roman elite, she now found herself at the center of a whirlwind of power dynamics that threatened to overwhelm her personal life. The quiet, dignified life she had once imagined for herself seemed impossible to reach in the face of the expectations placed on her as the wife of Rome's most famous general. And so, as Scipio's fame continued to grow, Aemilia found herself having to redefine her role, not just as his wife but as a woman of influence in her own right. Her life, though shaped by her marriage, was not defined by it alone. She would prove to be a formidable figure in her own right, holding her own in a world dominated by men, while continuing to support her husband through the challenges of their shared destiny. By the time of the Battle of Zama in 202 BCE, the weight of the Republic's future had come to rest on the shoulders of Scipio Africanus. The battle was a turning point, not only for Rome but for Aemilia Tertia. Scipio's victory over Hannibal, the general who had once seemed invincible, marked the end of the Second Punic War. But for Aemilia, it represented both an immense relief and an immense burden. While Scipio's triumph brought him great glory and solidified his place in history, Aemilia's own role was much quieter, much less visible. She had not fought on the battlefield, but she had fought every day in the heart of Rome. The years of separation, the loneliness, the uncertainty, these had all shaped her into a woman whose strength was often unrecognized but was no less formidable. When Scipio returned to Rome, a hero, the celebrations were grand. The people cheered his name in the streets, and the Senate awarded him the title Africanus in honor of his victory. Yet, despite the public acclaim, it was in the private moments, in the quiet chambers of their home, where the true cost of their victories was most apparent. Aemilia had borne the weight of those years. She had raised their children, managed their estate, and maintained the political alliances that her husband's career demanded. And as Rome's eyes turned to the future, Aemilia knew that her family's legacy was now inextricably linked to that of Scipio's. Yet, in the quiet moments of reflection, she also recognized that the greatest legacy she would leave behind was not in the titles or honors bestowed upon her husband, but in the strength she had shown throughout the tumultuous years. As time passed, the shadow of political intrigue began to cloud Scipio's later years. His fall from favor within the Senate, his eventual departure from Rome, and the struggles with his political opponents led to a series of personal and professional defeats. But throughout these trials, Aemilia remained steadfast. She supported him in silence, away from the public eye, though her heart often ached for the man who had once been the pride of the Republic. Scipio died in 183 BCE, far from the streets of Rome that had once hailed him as a hero. The legacy of his military genius was sealed. But for Aemilia, the loss was not just that of a husband. It was the loss of a partner with whom she had shared both the highest joys and the deepest sorrows of life. Scipio had given everything to Rome. Aemilia, on the other hand, had given everything to her family. As she aged, Aemilia's influence in Roman society waned. Yet she remained a respected matron, the embodiment of the Stoic Roman ideals of duty, sacrifice, and honor, though history remembers her more for her connection to Scipio Africanus than for any actions of her own. Her life was a testament to the resilience of the women who stood behind Rome's greatest men. She had not sought the glory of public recognition, nor had she longed for the fame that came with military victory, but in the quiet strength of her daily life, in the way she maintained her family's legacy. Aemilia Tertia left behind a mark on Rome that endured far beyond her own lifetime. In the years that followed her death, the legacy of Aemilia Tertia lived on not in the records of war, but in the stories passed down by her children and grandchildren. They spoke of her unwavering strength, her quiet wisdom, and the way she had kept the family intact in the face of every challenge Rome had thrown at them. She was remembered not just as the wife of Scipio Africanus, but as a woman who had shaped the course of history through the silent power of her presence. Her name may not have been as etched in the stone of Roman triumphs as Scipio's, but in the hearts of those who knew her, Aemilia Tertia's legacy was one of true strength, unyielding loyalty, and profound love for her family, Rome, and the future of her people.